The Trump administration has said that this particular consulate was engaged in espionage operations that involve stealing of corporate intellectual property and personal data of Americans. We've not yet seen the evidence for that. So it remains to be seen whether or not this is something unusual because, of course, all consulates and embassies around the world to some extent engage in espionage, certainly those of the major powers. This particular moment, I think, is a week of anti-China speeches that we have seen coming from the Trump administration. The bookends of those speeches are being given by Secretary of State Pompeo, and the last one will be given by him tomorrow, July 23rd. And I think in the run-up to that speech, the Trump administration was looking to do something that would get quite a bit of attention. There was reporting last week that the Trump administration might block members of the Chinese Communist Party from getting visas to come to the United States. My guess is that there was a decision to not go ahead with that because it would involve too many people and have too big an impact, sort of a nuclear option. So perhaps they came up with an alternate one of shutting down the consulate in Houston.
Is this about trying to block China's activities, or is it about trying to get Donald Trump re-elected?
Well, it may be both. I believe that Secretary Pompeo is quite determined to mobilize not only American negative thinking towards China attitudes, but also to really convince countries around the world that they should put more pressure on China. We just saw him in the UK talking with the Brits about trying to take more actions to put pressure on China. And this, I think, he sees very much as his legacy. At the same time, there must be political motivations as well. The Trump campaign sees that China is an issue that they can use to win votes, and they are probably trying to portray Vice President Biden as weak on China. Perhaps they will say that he somehow is willing to put up with espionage against Americans, which of course is absolutely not the case.
We've also seen some very serious allegations leveled by the director of the FBI against China. Where does all this stop? Where does this lead us in this relationship between these two global superpowers?
Well, we haven't reached the bottom yet. And it is hard to say at this juncture that the United States and China are not in a new Cold War. Shutting down a consulate is a serious action. The Chinese are likely to retaliate. And if they want to close down a consulate in an act of reciprocity, they could choose the one in Wuhan, which is the one that was opened in coordination with the opening of the Chinese consulate in Houston, or they could go big and shut down the US consulate in Hong Kong.
What would be the effect of that if that came to pass in Hong Kong?
That would be very damaging to American interests, as our consulate there is, of course, our eyes and ears on the ground in Hong Kong, getting information about the development of the situation, which is especially important now in the aftermath of the implementation of the new national security legislation. The United States and other countries want to be able to track how the legislation is being implemented.
At the same time that all this is going on, you've got large-scale military exercises, naval exercises involving the US, Australia, India. Is this all, do you think, part of a signal to China, or is this just coincidence that these things are going on at the same time?
Well, I don't think it's coincidence. There is increasingly coordination within the Trump administration for the purpose of strategic communications to China, signaling the concern that the United States has to try and persuade China to stop some of its behavior that is seen as unacceptable, not just to the United States, but frankly to a growing number of countries around the world, as we have seen Canada, the UK, and Australia end their extradition treaties, for example, with Hong Kong. So I think that there is increasing coordination on the issue of military deployments. I'm sure that the particular exercises that you mentioned were planned long in advance, but they are part of a general messaging campaign.
Given the mutual atmosphere of mistrust and an accelerating atmosphere that seems to have no bottom at the moment, are you concerned it could lead to actual conflict?
Well, there is definitely growing concern of an accident or even a deliberate skirmish. That could happen in the South China Sea, possibly Chinese actions against a US Navy ship that is conducting a freedom of navigation operation, or against another claimant in the South China Sea where the United States, such as the Philippines, the United States has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, and therefore the United States could easily get involved in such a confrontation. The most worrisome one, of course, is Taiwan. We now heard that the Chinese military aircraft are operating almost on a daily basis, intimidating Taiwan, flying around the island, crossing the center line of the strait, sometimes very large numbers of aircraft. And the United States is responding to that as well. And so there's always a risk of an accident and an air collision, such as we saw in 2001, when a Chinese fighter pilot was acting very belligerently against a US reconnaissance aircraft, ended up colliding with it, and his plane went down. He lost his life. And of course, the US plane landed in Hainan, and it became a political crisis between the US and China.